Welcome back to this little thing we call the Rain Race Podcast. It's a show where we talk about IMSA sports cars, WEC sports car racing, and it's not just me. Off to my right, you know him best as often the Esses. We know him here as Stu. How are you doing tonight?
It's a good night. It's a good night. You know, the my Senators are up 1-0. In a hockey game for those of you that are maybe not in North America. It's
Like the
NHL
shirt.
playoffs right now, and we're coming off a race weekend, so things are good. Things are good.
Yeah, we do have the WEC 6 Hours of Imola to recap to the best of our ability. It was the second WEC race in a row that was not at the greatest of times, admittedly, for us sitting down watching the entirety of the 6 hours. The first race, of course, was the 10-hour race we had at Qatar, which was on a Friday in the middle of a workday for both of us. And this one, of course, falling on Easter this year. I think it was a Saturday race last year at Imola, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Which would have been more convenient this year. But nonetheless, was able to catch what I could of it in the middle of doing all the other family arrangements of sorts. And thankfully, the WEC has upped their game this year with the highlights on YouTube, uploading very nice clips, 20-minute long clips even, of some of the battles that we saw on track, and then the extended highlights that they put out, capturing an hour of the race action condensed down for people to follow up with. So appreciate them doing that. Helps me out a lot. Helps you, I'm sure, as well.
Much
When we're trying
appreciated.
to get some info for the show, especially with how difficult it is to find the World Endurance Championship in Canada. I know you're only limited to the app that they have.
That's a good point. Yes. We are forced to purchase it from them if we would like to watch it live. So yeah, if there is one good thing to say, their YouTube game is strong. So tons of videos from this past weekend, and I think the full race is queued up for release. I'm not sure when, but it is soon.
Believe it was tomorrow. It might
Yeah,
be this weekend.
it's
Can't
soon.
remember exactly when they put those out, but yeah. IMSA and the WC both stepping it up as of
True.
recent, which is very positive to see. Nonetheless, we're going to give some of our thoughts on the race. Now, we're going to structure this a little bit differently. I've been talking to you, Stu, for the last month and a half now, saying we got to get these shows a little bit shorter because we've been encroaching on 2-hour shows week in, week out, and we're on the third week in a row here discussing things on this show. So, going to try to shorten things up a little bit. Not going to give a full recap of the entire race weekend. It's Thursday now. This race was a handful of days ago at this point. And like we just said, there are plenty of better ways to catch up on everything that happened over on the WEC's YouTube channel. Instead, what we're going to do is give some of our thoughts, some of our main takeaways from the race, especially some storylines leading into the 6 hours of Spa, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks' time as well. The first thing I want to talk about here, of course, knew it going into the race. I think you and I both were on the right track with the predictions, how strong Ferrari was going to be here at Imola in the hypercar class. Of course, they blundered that 1-2-3 finish last year here at home. It was one of the key storylines, I think, of the season, is how much that hurt them, especially losing to a rival as strong as Toyota. I think Toyota, is safe to say, would be Ferrari's perhaps biggest rival in the World Endurance Championship. If you look at Le Mans alone the past 2 seasons, this year had a lot of weight and a lot of pressure riding on them, but looked very strong from the get-go. They were very fast in practice, actually had a identical time to BMW in free practice 2, so it wasn't like they were running away with things. But in qualifying, it did look like it was going to be a very strong start for all 3 of the Ferraris until the number 50 got their lap times deleted for track limits in that qualifying session. That bumped them out from being able to compete for the pole and started them at the back of the pack. Really, that was a catch-up race for the 50. They had a lot of ground to pass, and as one of our main talking points is going to be here at Imola, this is a very difficult race to pass at, very difficult track to complete passes. Turn 1, probably your best opportunity. We saw some passes, some successful, some not. over in the two Ravazza left-hand turns as well, the second and last turn of the track, or second to last and last turn of the circuit. But overall, one of the most difficult passing opportunity tracks, if not the most difficult on the WEC calendar, although not quite as much as we saw with IMSA over at Long Beach a couple of weeks back.
True. Yeah, the old school narrow nature of this circuit, doesn't provide too many amazing passing opportunities, but it certainly did provide us with some other aspects to watch. There's definitely something to be said for the contrast in the tracks that the WEC have visited in these first two rounds. And I guess as their season continues, going from Qatar, a very wide open, sort of made for, MotoGP, made for Formula One now type circuit that offers wide, long runoff, and seeing the contrast of going to a track, like Imola, narrow, make a mistake and you immediately pay for it because you're losing multiple seconds, in the grass, or we saw it. I think it was one of the Alpines, went off, had to go through the gravel and take one of the sort of the access road right in front of the barrier to get back onto the track. And there's actual consequences for making a mistake, and we saw those play out here, and we saw them have a pretty large impact on this race, both with incidents that occurred and just some of those general mistakes going off track, losing maybe 5 to 10 seconds as a result of one of those mistakes. So it was. I know we'll talk a little bit about Imola as we go along here, but it was enjoyable to see some of the contrast from race one to here.
Yeah, you touched on this in our preview show last week. The sort of old school nature of this track sort of has some similarities to some of the circuits we see in IMSA, but not quite as frequently over in the World Endurance Championship side of things. I agree with a lot of that. And like you said, we saw that come into play this weekend. We saw safety car periods at this track that would not have been really an issue if similar crashes happened at Qatar because of how much runoff they have there.
Yep.
So a very different sort of feel for this race than what we had at the opening round about a month back now. Talked about Ferrari and thought they were going to run away with this race. Actually, Dove Jones beat me to the punch in the chat. Said exactly what I was going to say, which is that for as much pace as we thought they would have going in, some people said this was going to be an easy 1, 2, 3 for them. It was just for the chance to correct everything that went wrong for them last year. It really wasn't as easy as some people cut it out for them to be. We saw a lot of other manufacturers shaking it up here. The big thing that really this race turned into is a strategy race. I think mostly in nature to the fact that the track doesn't offer a whole lot of passing opportunities, and you can spend a lot of time here getting stuck behind slower cars. That was one of the main issues that happened in the race for the number 50 car, battling the number 8 Toyota, and we'll touch on that in a little bit here. I think the strategy calls are really what set this race apart. Played a factor last year in this race as well. Of course, that one was rain affected. It was a little bit different. This one, we saw teams in complete dry conditions just deciding to jump off strategy here and try something different, get out in clean air. And really the two teams that played that to their advantage this weekend, the two manufacturers, were BMW and Alpine, who I mentioned BMW were fast. They had strong performance in practice and in qualifying. They ultimately weren't race winning pace, I would say. They weren't too far off it, but they weren't quite up there with the pace of the Ferraris this weekend. Alpine themselves were a little bit further down the order as well. But both of them really, in the final couple stints of this race, using the timing of the safety cars earlier to their advantage, decided to split the strategy and really take those two remaining stints of the race and not just do a full fuel run and then a splash towards the end. What they decided to do instead was to cut those evenly, get out in clean air, run with lighter fuel, and ultimately that's a call that got both of them into second and third position for the finish of the race. Big difference from what we saw for the likes of the 83 Ferrari, which was running strong all day as well, in second for a lot of the race, and the number 8 Toyota taking a more traditional strategy. But both of them also getting stuck in traffic for a little bit of time, especially the 8 Toyota battling the 50, and we saw the consequences that had for them at the finish.
Yeah,
you left without words here. I think I nailed everything, didn't I?
I'm without words. Yeah.
All right. So how about this? How about we talk about one of the defining moments of the race, really, if we're going to continue with the hypercar class here, which was that battle, that 20-minute long battle, which you can watch in full over on the WEC YouTube channel between the number 8 Toyota of Sebastian Buemi and the 50 Ferrari of Antonio Fuoco. And if you want to make a comparison to a series like F1, that would be like Max Verstappen battling who's, I guess, the second most aggressive driver in F1 right now. I guess it's a difficult call.
Fernando Alonso?
Perhaps, but Alonso's not really at the same pace level as the Red Bull right now. So go back and say it's like a 2021 battle like we saw at Imola between Hamilton and Verstappen. That's sort of what we saw here. Again, difficult to pass, especially with these cars don't have that big DRS advantage going into turn one.
Yep.
And I mentioned earlier, your two main passing opportunities here are turn one and the second to last turn, really, if you want to try to make a dive there. Ultimately, Antonio Fuoco tested his luck at turn one a couple of times. The final attempt of that being, again, a little aggressive with the 8 Toyota trying to slam into the side of him. Reminded me of some of the older IMSA races that we had seen in the past where we saw similar moves pulled. Didn't work out for him at all, though. Ended up cutting down a tire, and that's the move that ultimately cost him any chance of being in the points this race.
Yeah, a little bit of argy bargy going on. That's kind of tying that back into the point earlier is, if we're this might be one of those situations that we only see at a track like Imola. If it's a track like Qatar or like Bahrain, we're probably seeing runoff there, and there's a little bit, the drivers maybe aren't going to be as inclined to make that contact. They're maybe going to use some of that runoff space. Maybe the tire doesn't get cut down, but then maybe there's a discussion around, is there like who deserves that position? And this obviously pretty cut and dry. I didn't think it was anything egregious happened there. Do you agree? It was hard racing. Or do you disagree?
I mean, by WEC standards, I would say it was a bit over the line, and
Fair.
clearly they thought the same because Fuoco ended up getting a post race penalty for it.
It was a post. Okay.
Well, he got a 45-second time penalty added after the race, equivalent to a stop and go, which didn't really change anything in the end result. But I think it was a bit egregious. You've got two guys going down at the fastest part of the track into turn one in that braking zone. Fuoco definitely moved over to the left to try to show Buemi he was there, to put it kindly, and didn't end up going well for him. It was sort of a self-penalizing incident. Whether or not you want to argue he should have gotten a penalty on top of it, I guess is up for discussion. But, to me, it was just a game of impatience right there. You could see he was spending 15 minutes at least trying to get by that slower car of the 8. As you said, if this was any other track on the schedule, I imagine he would have had that pass done and dusted maybe 5-10 minutes in max.
Yeah.
But here, with how difficult it is to pass, getting stuck behind the 8 car after your car has been working its way slowly up the field for the entirety of the race, you're closing in on a potential podium, but really working in towards the top 5. He just got impatient. That's really what it came down to here.
That's reasonable. I mean, maybe considering some of the other incidents that we ended up seeing in this race. Perhaps not. This is definitely, in my opinion, on a much lesser level than what we'll talk about specifically in LMGT3. But I can see that argument. That's fair, and maybe I was looking at that through my IMSA colored glasses, where generally that argy bargy type racing is not necessarily going to go penalized as often.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm sure we'll see more of this season. I knew before we even saw that contact between the two cars that, like I said, anytime you get Buemi battling Fuoco, it's sort of a box office event in the World Endurance Championship, and I'm sure we'll see plenty more of that this season.
Get your tickets.
I think that's the only talking points I had listed for the hypercar category. I don't know if you wanted to give any other shouts before we move things over to LMGT3.
I mean, I did. You already you highlighted Alpine. One of the things I admittedly, wasn't able to watch the entirety of this race live. I've been very much relying on highlight packs and etc. The past few days to get caught up. But one of the things that I would shout Alpine out for is I understand that they utilized the number 35, the car that didn't end up getting on the podium here. They kind of used them to test out, I believe it was the soft tires a little bit earlier than everybody else jumped onto them. And that really enabled them, using some of that information that they learned, to use that for the 36 car and help with that finish. So I think it's always it's one of the things that you love about sort of these team racing championships, especially where most of, if not all of the teams that are in the hypercar class really have multiple entries. I guess Proton is the only one that doesn't really have a sister entry paired with it, but it's cool to see. And one of those cool aspects of sports car racing, when maybe one of the team cars has had some misfortune earlier in the race, you can use them to help your finishing position with the other car, and that's exactly what Alpine did here. So good job to Alpine for using everything at their disposal and getting a great finish out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest with you, I think that's a manufacturer / team that was kind of punching a little bit above their weight this weekend.
Absolutely.
On raw pace, they definitely weren't a podium contending team. And like you mentioned, like I said earlier on, using that strategy to their advantage, they had a pretty clean race, especially for car 36. And that's the type of performance you want to see put out. There are a couple other notables as well who really probably didn't have the performance to be where they were. Toyota, I know Porsche as well was also leading for a portion of the race on different strategy. You'll have to see that in sports car racing. You'll have to see it really anywhere. But
yeah,
I think you put out a good point there. I'd also give a shout to Peugeot as well. Not only because I had a pick for them to finish in the top 5, which they didn't quite get that far, but first time getting into the hyperpole session with that new Evo Spec 9X8 after the 50 got bumped out. So stronger showing from them than we saw at Qatar this year, and hopefully sign of better things to come for them this season.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out the picks, because I got one right.
You're on the board.
Woohoo!
Only took a year.
This might be like the first WEC prediction for hypercar that I've even been in the ballpark of. So I'm gonna take my wins where I can get them.
Yeah, I think you've picked Ferrari for a good half of them. So we'll have to see if they can continue the strength that they're on right now as well.
That's true.
I do want to talk about the LMGT3 class, because I think this class, if you want to talk about pure racing here, and the class that was putting on maybe the better racing product, LMGT3 really delivered here. And as a second year, it sort of highlighted that. Imola, for one way or another, does seem to be a track that suits GT racing better than the hypercars. These cars were able to get their arms out a little bit more, as they did.
Get their elbows out too.
Yeah, they got their elbows out, and came at the expense of one of the Ferraris earlier in the race with the contact from Valentino Rossi in the 46 BMW. But overall, there were sections of this race that were sort of nose to bumper. Again, not passing every single lap, but there were some definite showcase drives here in this class that I did want to point out, mainly being the 46 BMW. I mentioned they had that drive-through penalty after hometown hero Valentino Rossi turned the 21 Ferrari in the final turn. That was the move that brought out the last safety car of the race. I was trying to remember if it was the last or the second to last. But a great recovery drive after that in the final couple stints of the race from Kelvin Vanderlinde. Coming back from well outside the top 5. I think he was down in 8th. He might have been even further down than that right after serving the penalty. But driving slowly up through the field, ultimately found his way up into 2nd and was battling with Richard Lietz in the number 92 First Form Manthey Porsche, if I want to get the full team name in there, for the race win. This was sort of a continuation of what we saw last year, Porsche and BMW. Not quite battling to the end of the race last year, but battling for the lead in the later stages of the race. This year, we got an even better showcase of that at the end. Really came down to the last corner to see if Kelvin was going to try to make a move there on the race win. Again, comes down to this track being difficult to pass at. It was going to come at a premium if he was to get that completed, but I think overall what we saw between those two teams in particular, but really the entire LMGT3 class, was a great race here at Imola, and one that stood out to me above the hypercar one.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't, like I said, I didn't get to see the entirety of the race, but the battles that I were able to see were great ones. Obviously, I mean, this was the closest finish in LMGT3 history to this point, at just a little bit over 0.3 between our top 2 finishers, and we saw a variety of cars that were that were in contention this race. We had the Heart of Racing number 27 that was showing speed. The Ferraris were showing speed. BMW looked strong. Lexus quietly went about their business and just continue to grow on the pace that they have. You have, I think I already touched on the BMWs, and then you also had the Corvettes from TF Sport that really didn't have the same pace that many of the other manufacturers did, but and I think it partially due to some success ballast, but well, let's not dive into that. But you look at them, they did exactly what they needed to do. They just ran like a very, very clean race, stayed out of trouble, and ultimately came home with a solid 6th and 7th position. So the LMGT3 class offered a lot in this race, and some good moments, some not great moments. You mentioned Valentino Rossi picking up that penalty. Definitely not one of the great moments of this race. You hate to see that, and especially end the 21's day essentially as a result. But yeah, LMGT3 offered us a lot in this race. You could probably have a podcast discussion solely on that class from Imola.
Yeah. Well, talking about the move again between the BMW and the Ferrari, it didn't just end the Ferrari's race. It ended really the 46s as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Talk about they finished 2nd. They put on a great show towards the end of the race, but they were pretty much a shoe-in to win that race, and especially with how big that would have been with Valentino Rossi winning here at his home race. One of those big storylines we missed out on. It's similar to what we had last year in the hypercar category, but the hardest losses bring back the sweetest redemption stories, I suppose. So maybe next year that's on the board for him.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a ways away. Let's.
I know my pick. All right.
Yeah, your pick. BMW's been strong here. This is 2 years in a row now that they've been strong. So
yeah. Also, you mentioned a strong race for Lexus. Absolutely wanted to point that out. 3rd and 4th place finish for them. You think of where that team was a year ago earlier in the season, especially at
Yeah.
this race, finishing well outside the points. They were bottom of the LMGT3 standings without really any substantial points on the board for the majority of the season. The turnaround that they've shown for the first couple of races this year has been immense compared to where they were last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that team slash manufacturer find a win at some point this season, and just really wanted to highlight the big turnaround that they've had recently.
Well, and something else to highlight with them, I was just looking at the points coming out of Imola. They're second in the championship right now. They're 11 points behind TF Sport, which is a bit of a gap, but we're only in round 2 of the season. It's still early, but pretty incredible to see the turnaround that they've had from where they were last year. I don't even want to say at this point last year, at the end of the season last year, and how they've turned that around and taken what they've learned over the off season. I think I was listening to the Weekend Sports Car, perhaps it was, and it was Graham Goodwin and I believe it was Stephen Kilby that were talking about Imola, and they had mentioned just the amount of work that and testing that Lexus has done, in the off season to get a better handle on these Goodyear tires. And clearly some of that, whether it's just some of that additional knowledge, maybe a little bit better of a BOP, combination of the two, certainly the additional testing isn't going to hurt. But regardless of the reason, Lexus has definitely turned a corner and looked to be much more competitive this season, borderlining on, a threat for the championship.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to start talking about the championship too early.
Yeah. It's still
David
we're
Flory from
so
David Flory from Toyota said the championship might be locked up by the middle of the season in hypercar. David, don't. I don't want to hear that, David. Come on. I mean, let's be real here.
Le Mans, so
absolutely, and we have bonus points later on at the championship finale in Bahrain as well. That is still way too early to call anybody a runner away for the championship right now.
Yep.
The last question I want to talk about here for Imola, with this being the second year we've had it on the calendar, we probably talked about it last year before it even had its chance to provide its first race, is Imola a good track for the World Endurance Championship? Of course, this race came at the expense of Monza, which I think was one of the fan favorite rounds. At least if you were watching on TV, I know there were some difficulties with attending that race in person and just the way that was managed. But from a fan perspective, is this track providing up to the level it should be? And I want to get your thoughts on this first.
Again, I mean, for me, as someone who watched the highlights and hasn't been able to sit down and watch the whole race, I think what I said earlier, I think reflects a lot of my thoughts on Imola. I think for me, Imola is an opportunity to showcase a different style of track that the WEC doesn't typically get to go to. It is a very diverse. It is a fairly diverse schedule that the championship visits. Mixed in. Of course, you have a track like Le Mans. You have mixed in with like Bahrain and Qatar, and I think Imola fits a very unique role in this championship, very much being that old school type track, which I think is important to maintain a track like that in the championship. Now, specifically to your question of is it a good track for the WEC? I mean, I like it because of a lot of those old school factors. Perhaps the racing isn't as good as you may get at some other tracks. Maybe it's probably not as good as we would get at, say, Monza, that offers like very clear, good passing opportunities, those heavy braking zones. They are very different tracks in that sense. But I think one of the things that you mentioned in this is when we started talking about the LMGT3 class is that, the LMGT3 class did, generally speaking, put on a good show here. They were able to pass a little bit more than, the hypercars were. we saw some good battles develop throughout that race. And, maybe there's some other factors that tie into that. Hypercar is an all pro class. LMGT3 is a pro am class. So, there's probably an argument to be made a little bit there, but I think this is a track that plays a very unique role for the WEC in their championship. And I don't want to see this style of racetrack be removed. Perhaps there are other tracks out there that offer a bit better racing while still offering this old school charm, if you will. But it's an okay track for the WEC. Can I say that?
Yeah,
Can I meet in the middle?
I think that's more than fair.
Yeah, because it's not terrible, but we're not going to look back. I don't feel like we're going to look back at an Imola race most seasons and think of, wow, what an amazing race Imola was.
Yeah. Well, that's what it boils down to, I think, is I don't think this race, unless we get a very big exception with like weather or just something crazy happens, all the other cars
under normal conditions.
Yeah. Under normal circumstances, this will not be a barn burner event on the WEC. The same way a track like, of course, Le Mans, the real highlight of the season, I think, for everyone. And then Spa as well, I think, is another one of those tracks that I would put up there in terms of just on-track action. It's not going to be one of those. It's not the same way. It's the same way that it's set up in F1 right now, where passing comes at a real premium. That does have some advantages as well, because some of the battles that you see come out of that are incredible. You can even look back in F1 2005 when they had their race here, that battle for the win between Schumacher and Alonso in the Ferrari versus Renault. That's looked at as one of the all-time sort of F1 battles from that season, but also it's just been something that's been highlighted recent years as well. And I think this track will sort of have those same moments. We saw pieces of that here in both the LMGT3 and Hypercar classes. I draw a lot of similarities of this race to a track that used to be on the IMSA schedule. Do you know what I'm thinking of?
I think I do.
Why don't you give it a shot here?
The track that it kind of compares to could be maybe a little bit like a Mid-Ohio.
I guess a bit. I was thinking Lime Rock because to me, my beloved Lime Rock Park home race. Passing in IMSA always came at a premium there. That race in IMSA was a strategy race. Typically, that's what dictated who won the race there. And this race serves a very similar role. So I think in that regard, that's sort of where this race is going to lie, is it's going to be a strategy-dependent race. Last year, we got a good example of that because we had the rain. This year, some people dove off the standard strategy because of the safety cars that we had in the middle of the race. I think that's where this race is going to shine best. And maybe if you had an entire race where this was green start to finish, you wouldn't have that opportunity. But to me, there's a lot of similarities between what we saw this weekend and what we used to see with IMSA at Lime Rock. So to say there are some moments where it provides a lot of exciting battles on track, but passing definitely does come at a premium.
Yeah, you're right in saying that. I think
it's a very scenic track as well. So
it is
like Lime Rock.
Pretty pictures is definitely good. And I mean, it's in Italy, so the fans are going to be diehard for one of the big manufacturers in the WEC right now, of course, in Ferrari. But you mentioned a good point there about full course yellows and things as well. This is a track that, unlike a Bahrain, a Qatar, even like a Coda, for instance, we're more likely to see more full-on safety cars being deployed in this race, which brings different strategy elements into it as well, and is much more likely to turn this into a strategy race, as you alluded to. So It's a different track. It provides a different kind of race than what we're used to seeing, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, we ultimately don't want to see the exact same product race in, race out. I mean, I guess maybe if it's an absolute barn burner, where so many different competitors, manufacturers are in it, are on for the win, but um, it's a different track. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, safe to say, I think it has its place on the schedule, and you said the same thing.
Yeah.
So we came to an agreement there. I just wanted to ask that, with this being, the second time it's been on the calendar, and I think some people have been vocal about preferring to have Monza over Imola. Just wanted to get that out there. I think that's sufficient, unless you had anything else you wanted to add on to our discussion about the 6 hours of Monza. Sorry,
No.
Imola.
Yes.
So
No,
my mind's gone.
Just let me have my last partial victory lap here that I almost went 2 for 2 in picks, and I'm done for the season now.
Soak it up.
That's
there
it.
You go.
That's it. Maybe the jinx is over. Maybe the jinx is over.
Maybe we're on a decent roll here between the two of us this year. I say decent compared to last year.
Yeah, I mean, you said your bonus pick was the 9X8 almost finishing in the top 5. That came close to happening. They had a solid
only
run.
Counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, man.
One more thing that I wanted to briefly mention, and I want to be, I guess we probably have to be careful with this topic to not have it just divulge into a BOP piece, but Iron Lynx and the Mercedes are nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
They've been a disappointment, a huge disappointment for me thus far. Like they are on another planet, and not in a good way, based on pace, and whether that is a result of BOP or a result of that program coming together fairly late. Whatever the reason might be, I definitely expected those Mercedes, with the sheer number of miles that they have on them in various championships around the world, that they would be, probably not contending for race wins, but maybe contending for not last. And they are not quick. There's no pace in those cars right now. So hopefully as the season goes on, we see them progress a little bit more, kind of like we saw Lexus start to progress over the course of last year. And maybe it's just going to be a similar story to that, where they're going to slowly progress as the season goes on, but not would love to see Mercedes be a little bit more competitive in LMGT3.
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to get there at some point.
Yeah.
As you mentioned with Alexis, it's a bit of a learning process for a manufacturer or a team coming over to a new manufacturer. We saw the same thing with Dakota switching from Mercedes, longtime GT3 team, over to Lexus, and now Iron Lynx switching from Lamborghini to Mercedes. I'm sure we'll see more out of that program this year.
I'm sure we will. Hopefully not in the back.
Yeah. I do want to switch gears here, talk about really the only main news piece, if you want to call it news. It's really just some rumors.
Well, until tomorrow morning, when the world rains down.
No, we're on a Thursday show now. All right, I switched the date on the show for this exact reason, to hopefully catch some of these news stories when they come out. Daily Sports Car put out an article today. I'm going to link that in the description for you to read yourself, which I would advise you go do. Because I'm not going to read it verbatim here, but I do want to go over some of the talking points from it that just sort of indicate where we currently are with the hypercar/GTP classes in both WEC and IMSA, and what we can expect for the future, as they usually do about once a year, just giving a status update on where those classes are. So a couple talking points I want to go over here. The first being one that we discussed a couple of weeks ago, that they're expecting an extension of the current regulations through the 2031 season. So that would be an additional 2-season extension compared to where we currently are, which is the end of 2029. And I would expect those in both championships as well. Gary Watkins over at Autosport suggested that 3 years is the most likely option for an extension. And if I'm understanding that correctly, that would be the end of 2032, not the end of 2031. But not entirely sure if that was what he was going for there. Either way, looks like we're going to have a 2 to 3 year extension with the current rule set that we have in both IMSA and the WEC. Again, as I think you and I and mostly everyone else expected after we got the recent announcements from Genesis, Ford, and McLaren. Also touched on the other main thing we discussed in a previous episode, which is the continuation of Peugeot's program in the hypercar ranks, but not with the 9X8, and that they are looking to develop a brand new LMH spec car. We touched on that in a lot more detail a few episodes back, but nice to have some confirmation here from Daily Sports Car that is something that they had heard as well. All the way down to the fine details that there was some discussion moving this over to an Alfa Romeo program. So looks like we might be seeing a new car in the woodworks for that manufacturer. I know there was some uncertainty previously on whether or not they'd be able to legally do that based on how many upgrades they've put into their current program, and with the current homologation cycle locked until the end of 2029. They're getting 2 more Evo upgrades at the start. I think it's the end of 2027, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, seems like they have enough in their arsenal to develop a new car. And then the main one I want to talk about here is a quote, and this is the only quote I'm going to read from this article because I want to get it right, but I do want you to read the rest yourself. Saying, according to paddock sources, there are 3 additional manufacturers, all with previous sports car heritage to draw from in talks with suppliers, with one known to be interested in joining as soon as 2027. This sort of goes against everything I discussed last episode, where I said, are we at the peak of the hypercar GTP regulations right now with 13 manufacturers either current or confirmed for the future? Seems like we have a few more on the table, potentially, with one potentially coming in just 2 years' time, which to me leaves the big question. Who's left on the table? We discussed last show. Mercedes was really the only one we could think of. They've been in discussion with suppliers recently, in recent months, about developing an LMDH car. Some sources had said that those plans had stalled out, at least according to Mercedes themselves, who knows if you should take it at face value or not. Call their bluff if you want. But that to you and I seemed like the most likely option if we were to get an additional manufacturer on the table.
Yeah. I think Mercedes is the low-hanging fruit here, right? It seems like there have been serious discussions based on, those who are closer to the situation than we certainly are. It does seem like Mercedes would be the odds-on favorite of the bunch to announce an entry. And you mentioned that one quote, with one known to be joining as soon as 2027. I think you'd probably have to circle Mercedes as the most likely to fill that. I think, was it the end of 2024 where we got those rumors coming out about Mercedes? It had to be.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was circulating, around fall last year to beginning of this year.
Yeah. So, based on timelines that we've seen from many manufacturers on, how long it takes to, produce the car and do the sufficient testing, everything that all entails. That seems like 2027 would be a reasonable time frame for Mercedes, a little bit over a year and a half from, I guess a year and 3/4 from now would probably be the start of the 2027 season. So what makes sense.
So here's the thing about that is, number one, we haven't seen Mercedes in the rumor mill anywhere near as much as we did like McLaren Ford was also heavily implied for a while.
Yeah.
Not to say that that doesn't mean that they're planning anything, because Porsche came as a big surprise to many people, myself included. They sort of kept the details of that program under wraps until right before it was officially announced. Um, Ferrari, their confirmation, or before their confirmation, those rumors came pretty late as well. Um, the main thing to me, though, is if this is a program that starts in 27, they'd have to announce that soon. And I
Well, Le Mans would be
think,
a pretty good spot to announce that, right?
yeah, stole the words from my mouth. I think Le Mans would be probably the most likely and best place at this point in time to announce a program like that, since they haven't already. To be honest with you, I thought for a long time that's when McLaren was going to do their announcement,
Yeah.
but they jumped the gun on that one. We've already seen a couple different manufacturers, though, make their confirmation for 2027 already. So for this unnamed manufacturer to be trying to join at the same time frame and not have any formal commitment yet, I would be expecting that soon. So we're talking Le Mans is less than 2 months away.
Yeah.
Get that confirmation out then, get some on-track testing going later this year, early next year. I think would be a timeline that would make sense to me.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time for Mercedes as well, because I do believe that they're in the works on developing a new GT3 car. But there was also some news this week that the GT4 car that they've had out for some time, I believe the homologation has been extended for that. They're no longer producing new cars, so maybe you could read into that a lot, and potentially reallocating some resources towards another effort, whether that's the new GT3 that's in the works, or if it could be towards a hypercar or LMDH program. We don't know. We don't even know if that's related, but there could be some of these pieces that are falling into place behind the scenes, or starting to fall into place as well.
Yeah. And I also want to spend a little bit of time here just going over anybody else who's possible,
Yeah.
in my head at least, and some of the other names I've seen thrown around. And these are in no particular order of how realistic they are, or whether or not we even think they're possible at all. These are just some of the brands that I've seen thrown out and just wanted to discuss them. A couple people were quick to point out some of the additional VW brands potentially, looking at the likes of Bentley, maybe Audi. I saw Audi was thrown in the chat earlier. Of course, they had their trial by fire of an LMDH program that never was. And Bugatti as well, who they're kind of still part of the VW group. There's just a interesting restructuring that was going on there with Rimac, but still partially under the VW umbrella. Bentley, I know they were rumored a few years back. To be honest with you, in the back of my mind, I thought they would be a great manufacturer to come back in 2024.
Yep.
100th anniversary of them winning their first 24 Hours of Le Mans. They have a history at Le Mans that dates back over 100 years now. They always sort of made sense to come back to me. But those discussions sort of stalled out for a while. There was rumors, pretty strong rumors, that they would be following the same path that Porsche and Audi were expected to go down, and even Lamborghini as well, before Lamborghini switched to a different engine and chassis supplier to go down that Multimatic and twin turbo V8 path. But ultimately, things never came to fruition there. Bugatti, they've been thrown around a lot by a lot of fans. I think people see that French connection there. They have a history at Le Mans. They haven't raced there since 1994, but they did win the race back in the 1930s, in 37 and 39. So a lot of people have brought them up. I've always seen them as an unlikely one personally, but who knows?
Well, one thing to note with Bugatti too is, again, I believe that this was mentioned on the Week in Sports Cars. I think it was. Bugatti has a new SUV, I believe, that's set to be released in the next couple of years, and we know that racing programs are as much, if not more, about marketing for the brand. So that could play a role in a a potential LMH LMDH program there as part of the marketing efforts for the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said there, these manufacturers, these racing programs that we see are almost entirely about brand identity and how much
Yeah.
flexibility they get to express that brand identity. You see it in the sounds of the cars, the appearance of the cars. By the way, on the sounds of the cars, don't put mufflers on the hypercars. If we're going to talk about the identity of sports cars, and I'm not going to go down this trap of arguing this for 20 minutes, but if we're going to talk about how big the identity of these cars plays a role for these manufacturers, look at people talking about the sound of the Aston and the Cadillac.
Yep.
And we can make that argument on a separate day. I just wanted to get those 2 cents out.
Yep.
Tata Motors, also mark that's been thrown around. They are, of course, the owners of Jaguar now, who, of course, were
Recently
prominent.
rebranded.
Well, they had that controversial rebrand, which I don't even know if that is still a thing, because I went to their website recently to see if that was even still a thing, and at least the U.S. site had reverted to their old logo.
Oh, interesting. So
Uh,
much negative backlash. Yeah, I mean, for me as well, the Canadian site is the old branding.
Regardless of what logo they decide to run. Of course, a very prominent name, especially at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. They've won that race 7 times, dating back to the 1950s. Of course, they were also prominent in the Group C and GTP eras of the World Sports Car Championship and IMSA, the previous golden age of prototype racing, if you will. Always sort of a manufacturer that made sense to come back. And they were involved in the initial technical discussions for the hypercar regulations, but we haven't heard a lot out of them recently. But if we're going to talk about the 3 most likely, and one of the 3 I would put up there, they're one that stands out to me, even though we haven't heard a lot from them in recent years. But a return for them to sports car racing, especially in the top class, would be much welcomed by me.
Yeah. I found the disgusting branding. It didn't take long.
Is it on their global site?
No, I am on Jaguar.
Yeah, I don't want to get into
so.
a argument with the pronunciation here. I'm gonna
Yeah. Let's just
British.
start it off butchered anyways. It's
Call
all
it
over their
Jaguar.
Instagram still. So
Okay.
yeah.
Geely, Chinese mark, is another brand that people have brought up.
Yes.
The majority owners, 51% owners of Lotus, who of course raced at Le Mans in the 1950s. They also raced there more recently in the GTE ranks with the Evora in 2011, and they had the T128 car in LMP2 back in 2013. So they have the experience, they have the pedigree to go with sort of what this article was hinting at. They were also, to my knowledge, involved in similar initial discussions around the introduction of the hypercar regulations, but again, haven't really heard much from them in recent months / years. If they have been working on something, I'd imagine it's been done pretty quietly behind the scenes. Nissan, of course, they've been prominent in some of the more recent prototype eras in World Sports Car Racing. Of course, go back to Group C. A lot of success there. GT1 in the 24 Hours of Le Mans back in the late 90s. And the ill-fated LMP1 hybrid effort from them that lasted all of 1 race. Perhaps they're looking for a redemption story here themselves. The issue here for me with Nissan is that brand is going through a bit of a crisis right now, both financially and just in terms of where they are as a company. They've switched CEOs recently. They've been on and off in discussions on trying to merge together with Honda. Those negotiations fell through back at the end of last year, but now I see that they might be back on soon at least. So I don't really know if Nissan's in a position right now to jump up to a factory prototype racing program. But who knows? Perhaps this is all part of their restructuring strategy. I've always sort of discounted them as a possibility because they've been weaning off sports car racing recently. They've
Yeah.
started to drop their GT3 and GT4 programs. Um, their prototype program most recently didn't go too well. They also had that IMSA DPI program that didn't have anywhere near
True.
as much factory support as the other manufacturers in the class like Cadillac and Acura and Mazda. So to me, they've always been sort of the odd one out. But again, throwing them out here as a possibility because they have been mentioned recently in recent years that some of the top senior officials in that company were at least looking around either hypercar or LMDH regulations.
Yeah, that one's probably more of a long shot. It seems like they're uh, cutting some of their limited programs in recent memory too. They don't have any support for, I think it was the GT4 car here in North
Yeah.
America anymore. They were running some in the GT World Challenge America, or whatever, GT4 America, I guess it is.
Yeah.
But that has the plug has been pulled on that. So yeah, that one might be a true long shot. But we've seen crazier things happen. So
Well, and it's worth noting that if you asked me a week ago, I didn't think any of these manufacturers were possible at all.
that's true.
So,
Well, I mean, when we talked about this, was it a week ago or 2 episodes
yeah, it
ago?
was the last episode.
We're like, yeah, exactly. Who's left? And now we're hearing that there are three that are serious.
Or possible, at least.
Possible, yeah.
And the last one I wrote down is Mazda. Of course, most recently in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship in the DPI ranks, where they had a lot of support. I talked about this in the last episode. I think somebody had a question about it. And to me, a lot of that program revolved around John Doonan himself.
Yeah.
And you could see sort of the strength of that program die out when John Doonan left to become the president of IMSA.
You don't mean to tell me that John Doonan is passionate about sports car racing, do you?
Well, he's a bit. I think
A
it's
little
safe
bit.
to say he's a bit. But, they haven't, to my knowledge, been involved in really any discussions with the new formula. Of course, they left the DPI ranks at the end of 2021 and didn't make it to the end of that formula in 22. And I just haven't seen them as a likely pick either. They do have history at the 24 Hours of Imola, of course, with that win in 1991. I don't think the hypercar regulations restrict them from putting a rotary engine in the car. Not that I would expect in a million years that they would.
That would be something.
There's your comeback if you want to get some marketing.
The hypercar grid would be a true symphony.
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, your muffled rotary engine at least. I don't see this one as likely either. I sort of put this one in the same boat as Nissan, where, like, again, I guess you can talk about it if you want, based on their previous experience within the past 5 years in IMSA, but to me, that's as far as it goes.
Yeah. Mazda would be a cool one to see, but yeah, another one of those manufacturers that, hasn't really been doing a ton, it seems like, of new programs, or that I've heard of, racing programs recently.
Right.
They had a TCR car that was ready to go, but just never. Then I think John Doonan left for IMSA, so never really got put into existence, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
and
bring back Mazda.
Sure. I mean that the amount of support they had with that program really fell pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Talking specifically
Very
about
quickly.
the DPI program, I mean, that was an effort that was run by Team Yost in IMSA. And it's crazy to think about that. I was thinking about that the other day, how really only 5 years ago, because it was 2020 was the final year we had Team Yost, right, in IMSA?
Yeah.
And then in 2021, it was fully Multimatic.
Yeah.
They had just arms full of support in that IMSA program. And it started to slowly scale back, and then, of course, died completely after John Doonan's tenure. But
It all went downhill after the summer of Mazda.
Well, they won in their final race, and I will always
That's true.
say I was there to see that. So
That was a great race for them too. Like
yeah,
you want to talk about battling adversity and coming back from early issues. Like that was a fun race to watch.
and using those trademarked late Petit Le Mans full course yellows to your advantage.
True, true.
Yeah.
I
Those
I
are the only
have
manufacturers I have. I want to know if you have any others you were thinking of.
I do have one more. I
Oh
do have
boy,
one more.
this
So
time of
again,
year.
probably a long shot, but I think there's a pathway for this one because it has been discussed in sports car spaces in previous years, and that's Dodge. So Dodge has been, there's been more discussion on that as perhaps bringing it to North America as a rebranded Peugeot. But I think there's the argument, sure, that Dodge is like these manufacturers aren't necessarily going to want to have multiple of these cars running under their same umbrella and maybe competing against each other. But I mean, we do have manufacturers that are part of the same group or same overall blanket company that are running out there together. Dodge has the Le Mans and the sports car racing history. They have a pretty storied history with the Viper. I don't really know what Dodge's financial situation looks like now. I know a few years ago is definitely a little bit shaky, but I honestly don't know if that's changed enough to be able to justify a racing program. But they are also starting to introduce some new racing programs. They do have a fairly big presence in the NHRA drag racing here in North America. They've recently announced that they are returning to NASCAR in the form of the one of the lower sort of tiered, the truck series. That makes a lot of sense. They do produce a lot of pickup trucks in North America. We've talked about plenty of long shots. I think Dodge could be a long shot. It seems like they're interested in getting into some more forms of racing again. And what better way for Dodge to get back into racing than to go head to head with your Corvettes, or I guess it wouldn't be Corvette. It's going to be Cadillac and Ford and BMW, all these manufacturers that they are going head to head with in competition for car sales, specifically in North America. I don't think Dodge I don't even know if they're sold outside of North America, but there's maybe a chance there.
Yeah, it's certainly been rumored before, or at least
Yeah.
discussed. $1 million question there is, does Stellantis want to, like
Yeah.
you said, have two different brands, not necessarily competing against each other?
True.
It goes without saying that when these three manufacturers were mentioned, it doesn't necessarily say they're going to race in either IMSA, the WEC, or both.
Yep.
We could be talking about some brands here that are only planning on running an IMSA.
Yep.
If you have a Stellantis brand like Dodge, like Maserati, like Alfa Romeo, maybe, all brands that are under the Stellantis banner along with Peugeot, then maybe that's a possibility, even if it comes in the form of developing a brand new LMDH car and not just running a rebadged 9X8 or whatever prototype they end up developing in the future, it sounds.
Well, and there wouldn't be any rules against, technically, Peugeot and Dodge, using the same engine or something like that in the car, right? Like that was
VW's plan, was to do exactly that.
So you could, still have, those two kind of separate entries, even if they're on a separate platform, an LMH versus the LMDH, and that could you could share some of that development between those two programs in the form of something like an engine.
Yeah, would certainly be interesting.
Yeah.
Couple other things I want to discuss here that came out of this article. There was one point that mentioned that, of course, all of these new manufacturers, if they were to come into the sport, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a 30 car grid in 2027, 28, 29, because it would likely also come at the expense of some of the current manufacturers that we have potentially leaving the sport. I don't want to go too far in here because, to be honest with you, I'm clueless as to who that might be. Apart from the one standout, which I think everybody thinks of as Lamborghini.
Yeah.
The future for them is definitely the darkest right now, just meaning that we don't really know where that program could go after this current partial season that it's running in IMSA, unless some customer wants to step up to bat and run that program next year. But seems like IMSA would be the most likely path forward with that car,
Yep.
and not the WEC, because they just really don't have. Privateer, I assume, wouldn't have the resources to run a 2-car program there in a world
That's
championship,
true.
and don't even know if they'd be able to run a full season in IMSA, much less the just Michelin Endurance Cup races they've run the past couple of years there. So they're the one that I think I and everybody else has been looking at as probably the one that's out the door first right now, if somebody is to leave after this season. Beyond that, I think it's wide open. It's difficult to know who isn't looking to extend the program beyond its initial commitment. I mean, some of those earlier ones that joined. Toyota's kind of interesting to me because I don't see Toyota leaving, but I do see them at a certain point wanting to transition focus over to hydrogen. And I don't
Yeah.
know if that comes at the expense of their current LMH program. We know when the hydrogen cars were initially unveiled in 2023 and Toyota unveiled their hydrogen prototype concept, their plan was to run those cars alongside each other. Of course, back then, the plan was to have those hydrogen cars on track, I think in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. And now it's been pushed back to 28 and potentially even further. So,
Well, they don't even have the regulations out
no,
for what that would look like yet. So,
no.
yeah, that's getting to be a distant possibility as well, even for 2028.
Yeah, I am interested to see if that's something that Toyota looks into doing. Again, maybe not leaving prototype racing altogether, but restructuring it. And then for other brands, who knows who's in the discussion there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then final point I wanted to make from this article, because it sort of tied into another piece that we saw come out last week, I believe, is about BMW Team RLL over in IMSA. And we made a point last episode, not really trying to be too harsh on them, but we were doing a bit of bashing on BMW and their lack of results in IMSA this year, given the raw performance that car has had, at least in one lap pace, maybe not quite so much over the course of a race. It just seems like that they can't execute the true potential of that car the same way that the Team WRT is doing over in the World Endurance Championship right now, who's taking a car that isn't quite there on one lap pace, but is getting the race results in just through consistency. Sort of the opposite of what we're seeing with RLL and IMSA right now. There was an article again put out by Daily Sports Car, like I said, late last week, that indicated that they might be on the way out, and that BMW would be looking for a new partner to race with in IMSA. There were a couple names thrown around there. Chip Ganassi Racing was one of them. Pratt and Miller was also one of them, who of course stepped up this year to race an LMP2 car. Is there reasoning for them to run that LMP2 car? Sounds like there potentially could be if they want to jump up to racing in the GTP ranks, although it would be pretty interesting given their long and strong tie-in with Corvette over in the GT ranks over in IMSA. You especially wanted to get some thoughts here. I wanted to see what you thought about all of this. As I said, we discussed some of those shortcomings last episode, but the official, I don't want to say official, but the writing in an article from a reputable source saying that this could potentially be the final season that we see BMW Team RLL, which is a partnership that dates back to 2009, could be coming to an end.
Yeah, I don't I so everything that I understand about this situation with RLL and BMW is that this is a yearly occurrence. This is part of German law when they're doing these contracted type deals where it's a requirement. I think they have to get three tenders, or they have to have these three offers or something on the table for them to consider before renewing the deal. Maybe there's somebody that knows a little bit more about that in chat, but from what I understand is that this is kind of just all part of the yearly the yearly cycle, I guess you could say, for the team. I was just scouring the internet for when we found out last year that RLL was going to return with BMW. And I'm looking at a Sports Car 365 article from September 4th. So again, pretty late in the year. But I do believe that this is pretty consistent with what that team goes through on a year-to-year basis, renewing that contract. Maybe there's a little bit more to it this year. You do have some additional options out there that could be real possibilities. Pratt and Miller have been very vocal recently about wanting to get on the top level, getting with a top level program. They've of course added their LMP2 program this year, and I think they said they might be looking to expand on that in the near future. So you do have to look at it. Could be very realistic to see a Pratt Miller, obviously a Chip Ganassi with all the experience that they have, but I still very much personally am expecting that RLL will be running those BMWs until we hear something otherwise that's really pointing the finger at one of these other manufacturers coming forward. I think while we've talked a lot in the opening races about the BMWs, especially in IMSA, and some of the issues that they've had, I think there's no doubt that how this program has developed from year one to this year has been a drastic improvement. And I think they're borderline on being championship contenders. I mean, if Porsche wasn't perfect to this point in IMSA, then I think we could be very much having that discussion. But I think I will believe it when if this is a story that continues on with very credible I don't know if sources are the right word, quotes, then I think maybe there's something to it, but for now I think this is just part of the process.
So have we in the past gotten any public indication like this that RLO might be on the way out? Because you mentioned part of the process with them, with BMW, that this would be really normal. Andrew Kissinger, who's sometimes in the chat for this podcast, he used to work with the team RLL, said that these were things that, I think he posted this, that these were discussions that were being made even back when he was working with the team, and he hasn't worked with them since 2023 to my knowledge. So it sounds like this is something that hasn't been new entirely. What is interesting to me, though, is somebody picking up the story and making it public for the first time. Because if this is a routine thing, then what differentiates this year from any other year? Are BMW more strongly evaluating other teams? We have a lot more teams on the table right now than we had previously. Of course, Chip Ganassi Racing left that Cadillac program last year. Our big question is, where are they going to end up? They've been thrown around a little bit with the Genesis program when that comes to IMSA, but nothing formal there. And then Pratt and Miller, again, if they're looking to expand into GTP as well, unless they get a customer program with like Cadillac, which would be sort of fitting in my mind, but maybe there's not the capacity from Cadillac to do that, then maybe they're also an option here as well.
Yeah, it's I'm not able to find anything, just off the cuff about BMW and some of the previous years. I guess Andrew, yeah, I don't think Andrew might not be in the chat tonight, or maybe wouldn't even be able to speak to that too much. But it'll be interesting to get that sort of if there is any information able to provide from that. But it it's always difficult to say like how true these rumors all are. There was another recent rumor with BMW as well, just last week as well, that they could be exiting, exiting IMSA with their LMDH because of tariff concerns. And Andreas Roos shot those thoughts down immediately, and I believe he said something along the lines of that where some of these rumors come from is ridiculous. Really putting, some strong words behind, the idea that BMW isn't really, there's no plans to exit the North American, GTP championship. So I think as with a lot of things, you take things with a grain of salt and see how they develop over the summer. If we're still talking about, I don't expect that a decision is going to be made on this anytime soon. If I mean, I don't have an extensive knowledge of how these, tender processes work, but I can't imagine that they go very quickly. I imagine this is going to be dragged out over a number of months. We saw, as I said, that it was confirmed in early September of last year, that RLL would be returning to run the GTP effort. So I would expect an announcement on who's going to be running that program around the same time next year. And we can't forget, BMW at the beginning of last year were not good. Not good in IMSA. Really had not been showing any step forward that they were taking, and they did keep that program despite there being, there were other teams that could have taken over that program. I know maybe, Meyer Shank hadn't had a program confirmed until the middle of the summer. We knew at that point that Chip Ganassi also wasn't going to be running Cadillacs the following year. So there were other options available during this process last year. So let's see how it plays out.
That's the name of the game, isn't it?
Yep.
That's how we play on this podcast. Let's just wait and see what happens.
Just like how we roll is an hour and 20-minute episodes or longer, right?
Hey, listen, we're getting ready to wrap it up. I do want to jump over to some questions. We're doing horrible at shortening these shows, but we do have some questions I want to jump to. And again, appreciate people who put those in the chat so we can discuss them and sometimes argue as well. Kevin put a question in the chat, starting off strong here, and said, I know everyone's favorite topic. How can the Porsches and IMSA be at the top in the WEC other than for a short period of time for the 6 at Imola be nowhere? I understand there's two different balance of performance is going on there, but it seems like the WEC team, either the WEC team or the WEC as a series is missing the mark. Look, to play devil's advocate here, BOP definitely does play a big part of that. You can look at last season in the World Endurance Championship. Porsche started out strong. They won Qatar. They finished just shy of a win in the second race at Imola. This year, they haven't quite been at that same level. And Ferrari, meanwhile, is looking just as strong as Porsche was at the beginning of last season. So
yeah,
that is one of the factors for sure. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not. What I think is important for people to realize is it is not the only factor. And I've been getting a bit more vocal recently as more and more balance of performance complaints pop up on social media. It seems like you can't go more than 2 comments on a social media post from IMSA or the World Endurance Championship recently without somebody talking about BOP. But you have to remember the other differences as well that we have between these two programs. Yes, they're both Team Penske, but we're talking about completely different engineering teams within Penske running these programs, completely different drivers for the most part. I know there is some crossover in the endurance races over in IMSA. Different rule sets and ultimately, the World Endurance Championship has many more cars than IMSA right
Yeah.
now that Porsche's up racing against. So I think all of those play a big piece. BOP, of course, as I said, I'm not going to lie to you and say that doesn't have a factor, because I think that is one of the larger determining factors here, but not the only one is the main point I want to make.
Yep.
And
I
you know
think you
what?
nailed it.
That is a pendulum that's going to swing. You're
Yeah.
going to
Oh,
see
100%.
races. You're going to see IMSA races this season where Porsche is nowhere to be found, probably. And by Porsche standards, that might mean still finishing in the top five.
Second.
Um, but you're also going to see WEC races this year where they're the fastest car in the field. I'm almost certain of it. Um, so the name of the game with what we got in the current style of racing.
Yep.
Just going down the list because there were a lot of other comments that were put in. Anyone see the Genesis engine? Interesting, they're fusing two
Yeah.
WRC blocks together. There's a lot of similarity between that engine actually and the one that was in the Glickenhaus, which was also using the same exact philosophy. It was the engine out of the Hyundai WRC car. Two of those inline fours bolted together, turbocharged. I guess it's already turbocharged in the WRC, and you got a V8 now over in a prototype. So I can't remember if the engines are the exact same between the Glickenhaus and the Genesis, but from what I remember, it is the exact same philosophy between those two cars and a very similar engine block at least.
Maybe took some improvements to make from that. I mean, the Glickenhaus engine was pretty solid, wasn't it?
It
That
was
they were never.
reliable. The thing
Yeah.
about the Glickenhaus engine is it was pretty reliable for the most part. They were a big storyline at Le Mans, especially for having a 100% finish rate at Le Mans.
Yeah.
In the couple of seasons that they ran there. So,
And was it more recently? Was it Van Wall that took the engine
yeah,
and did it in their car? Yeah.
yeah,
But they never ended up racing with it.
right. A couple of people talking about Honda and what they would need to race in the World Endurance Championship / Le Mans. As it always has been, they need to run two cars in the full WEC season. So
Well,
until
they
they
need
can
a big
find
wig to green light it.
right, until
Yeah.
they can find someone to green light it, and then they can find a team who's able to run two cars full time, and then drivers who are able to drive said two cars full time, you won't see them at Le Mans.
Yep.
My question is, how many platinum / gold rated drivers will be left to choose from with all these new teams coming in? Going to be a lot of clashes with different series. That's a great point. The talent pool, although it's still as wide as it used to be, the amount of options you have to pick from are getting shorter and shorter. We used to have an LMP2, which is like kind of one of the main reasons we have LMP2 Pro-Am now. As a subclass is just because of how stacked the LMP2 class used to be at Le Mans. So many drivers used to run there because they didn't have any seat in the top class. Nowadays, we're seeing 20 plus cars easily at Le Mans. We're talking 25 plus, encroaching on 30. If some of these new manufacturers come in beyond the ones that we already have confirmed. So you're right. That is a great point. And especially with the series clashes, depending on how many of those cars are running full time in either championship, that'll be a big factor as well.
You know what? Honestly, this isn't a huge concern for me. Even with more factory outfits being announced, at the end of the day, I think there's always going to be that super elite class of driver. Your Nick Tandy's. I'll throw Peepo in that. Like these drivers that are elite in what they do. And there's still going to be that very highly skilled class, but I think what this does is there's still many of these highly skilled drivers that are gold or platinum rated drivers, but just don't have the opportunities that are necessarily available to them to to run in one of those factory cars, and they could be running in a a slightly different racing discipline as well. I mean, you look at IndyCar, the number of drivers that are on the IMSA grid right now that have previously run in IndyCar, previously run in F2, but you have to be very, very good or have very, very deep pockets to be able to get to the top class in open wheel racing. So I think there's plenty of prospects out there still for factory teams to to go out and develop. And we've seen a number of those young drivers come up and ultimately get rides with the factory in recent years with some of these new manufacturers. And we see the approach that Genesis is taking, for instance, right now with a driver like Jamie Chadwick, and trying to nurture her into one of their potential future hypercar drivers. So I think I'm not too concerned about that. You look around the world, and I mean, we have how many cars go into the Spa 24? Like that's like 60 entries. And I know there's not a lot of, or you could use many other races. Well, maybe Nürburgring doesn't have quite as many, of those elite pro drivers, but I think there's plenty of elite drivers to go around for these hypercar efforts.
Yeah, my concern's not for the top races like Daytona and Le Mans. I think there's always going to be demand for drivers to want to race in those races. My main concern also isn't really around there being a shortage of platinum and gold drivers. I think there's always, like you said, there's going to be a wide pool of drivers there. Exiting F2, they can't find a ride in F1. Seems to be a pathway out to sports car racing for a lot of these guys. Some of them go to IndyCar as well. The problem I see is the clashes, like was mentioned here. A lot of those drivers go to Formula E. And Formula E, in one way or another, always seems to find a way to clash with the World Endurance Championship at least once in the season. And I know it's not the end of the world because you can now run two driver programs in the WEC. It's not that big a deal. But to me, that's the main struggle point there, is if some of those guys also go out and race Formula E, and some of these manufacturers are trying to put together two driver lineups in either IMSA or the World Endurance Championship. That's where the main pain point probably would come from.
Yeah, I mean, it may just force some of these drivers' hands a little bit more, that you need to make a commitment to one. If we're going to give you a factory drive here in the WEC or an IMSA or, whichever championship it is, you're in it. You're committing full stop to this championship. And I guess there's probably a money factor maybe that's involved in that too for drivers. But it's a good point. It's a good point. Like we are already seeing it that drivers, being forced to choose and stretch across championships. So it's certainly something that we will probably end up monitoring and talking about more here in the coming seasons as more manufacturers come online.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. We are at the trademarked hour and a half show somehow.
We're still shorter than Long Beach.
Yeah, we're still shorter than Long
Barely.
Beach. With all the talk of trying to figure out ways to make the episode shorter, it always comes back to an hour and a half here. But like I said, we got a lot of exciting things to talk about in the show, and also some questions to answer as well. So appreciate everybody who tuned out live, or if you're listening on a podcasting platform. Things are not going to be slowing down for us. We have no show next week, but we'll be back hopefully in 2 weeks' time to give a preview to these 6 hours of Spa, which is, as I sort of hinted at earlier, my second favorite race on the World Endurance Championship schedule. I think it's such an iconic track, and really a great preview race for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, of course, being the peak for me. And then we have IMSA.
Spa's conflicting with
Laguna Seca.
Why can't these governing bodies get this right?
Yeah, it's the second. Is it the second or the first schedule clash?
Well, this should be the first clash of the year.
Yeah, one of two.
One of two.
'Cause we have
CTMP
one.
in Brazil, right? Is the other
Right.
one?
Yeah.
I think.
So we do have that clash, but we'll be discussing both races in a couple of weeks' time. And then, like I said, things aren't going to be slowing down because we're getting close to June, where we're going to be discussing, of course, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and expecting a lot of news stories to come out around that time as well. So get subscribed to the podcast or follow it on a podcasting platform if you don't want to miss any of that. For tonight, though, like I said, I want to thank anybody who tuned in live or on a podcasting platform. We'll be back in 2 weeks to discuss even more, and I hope to see you all there. Take care.